Heeding the Caregiver Call, the story of Barbara Ella Milton Sr. and Alzheimer's disease, read by her daughter, Dr. Barbara Ella Milton Jr. And today I'm going to start with the chapter entitled Introduction. Barbara Ella Milton Sr. My mother was born in 1944 in Camden, New Jersey, to Ethel Milton Watson, a single black mother. She was the second child and eldest daughter. 8 siblings followed her in close succession. My grandmother always worked, mostly cleaning house and doing laundry for white women. She also liked to go out and have a good time. From an early age, caring for younger brothers and sisters was part of my mother's life. There often wasn't a lot of food in the house, and all the kids shared bedrooms and beds. My mother became resourceful and resilient. She and her older brother and cousins figured out ways to get extra food and coal. They would run errands or do small jobs for people. She enjoyed telling how she would dress like a boy and go downtown and shine shoes to make money. Some of what she made use of to help her family, but she was not shy when it came to disciplining them. There are parts of her childhood my mother did not talk about, and I believe that really bad things happened to her. There seemed to be a lot of unresolved pain and hurt inside her, which often came out as rage. My mother raged. She raged at having parental responsibilities forced upon her. She raged at being called nigger. She raged at not having enough food. She raged at being poor. It was a global rage that was expressed at home, in the streets, in the schools, and in places she worked. As a young woman, she was often in fights. That rage stayed with her in some form all her life, sometimes more explosive, other times more subdued and harnessed, but it was there. In some ways, the rage was righteous and appropriate. We should all rage against oppression and injustice. I also believe the rage was a little girl's way of screaming for help and trying to remove barriers that impeded her joy and happiness. The rage hurt her. It colored her moods and her relationships. The rage also protected her and helped her to survive. My mother always loved girls and women. She told me of a first love when she was 12 years old that ended because the young girl moved away from Camden. She told me many more times that the love was a pure love. She married a woman when I was 10 years old. I knew because I found her wedding pictures. My mom was a big teddy bear of a butch in a white tuxedo, and her bride was in full white wedding gown. She looked so happy in the photo, which captured the couple cutting the wedding cake. This was in 1969, and it was a revolutionary act by some standards, and certainly in pure defiance against cultural and religious norms. That relationship ended abruptly and tragically, and I would see that sorrow time and time again as my mother's lost love with other women. There was so much hatred for gay people and violence against them in the black community and the black churches. My mother had one brother who was gay, and he caught hell too. He died of AIDS. She wanted love, and love was denied. More sorrow atop her rage. My mother's adult life was lived with the purpose of never going back to the days of her childhood where she didn't have enough food or clothing or warmth in her home. She worked hard and relentlessly toward those goals. My mother always had a job, and many times a job and a few hustles. She learned the lesson from her mother. Nobody gives you anything. If you want something, then you work for it. Work is honorable, so my mother worked. She did all kinds of jobs, and the work started when she was very young. She did work in assembly lines, cleaned houses and office buildings, drove buses, picked fruit on farms, and worked in retail. Her last job was at a sheet metal company where she had read blueprints, and operated several machines, fabricating pieces for many projects. She was highly regarded there, both by the management and by her fellow workers. Many of the younger women who worked there saw her as a mentor and would ask her for advice about work and personal problems. My mom was proud when she was promoted to a quality control position. She was the first woman to get that job. An injury on the job and other health issues forced her into early retirement from work. She was awarded a permanent disability. After retiring from work, my mother lived on Social Security and a small pension. She spent a lot of time alone at home and seemed very content to do so. She had set up her house just the way she wanted and was very comfortable there. Her main outside activity was bowling. My mother was an awesome bowler. She could easily have been a pro. She was a member of several leagues and on other days would go to the bowling alley to practice for hours. Her house was filled with bowling plaques and trophies, and at the end of the season, she usually won substantial amounts of money for the highest average, the most strikes, the most wins, and so on. She also enjoyed spending time with her friends, many of whom were her bowling buddies. She enjoyed going to a friendly club with music to have a drink and to listen. She liked to cut up while playing cards. She liked to go out to eat with her close friends, and she volunteered at a food pantry at the church. And she had a soft spot in her heart for animals and cared for 3 cats. Her last was named Pepper. Mommy liked earning money and she liked spending it. She managed her money with the skill of a professional CPA. She purchased a home, had a car, and her cupboards were packed to the gills with bulk purchases of food and household supplies. She even fought successfully to keep her house when it was the target of encroaching gentrification. I have great sadness that my mother tended to view her achievements in these areas of her life with little pride. She felt good about having her own home, but in terms of her station in life, she felt that her wings had been clipped at an early age and that she had failed to soar to her greatest heights. She did not complete middle school or go to high school or to college. She had big regrets about her stunted formal education. She, and only she, honestly felt that she was not smart. She was brilliant, and I made it a point to remind her of that whenever her self-doubt bubbled to the surface. This leads me to the last aspect of my mother that I would like you to know about. She was affable and gregarious. She loved to laugh and have a good time. She was oftentimes described as the life of the party. What an antidote for pain and suffering. She loved to live life and laugh. She was witty and funny and at times just straight up goofy. I didn't see that side of her too often, but when I did, especially in the last few years of her life, as I cared for her, it lit up my heart. I was grateful in the end to witness it because for most of my life, it was just buried under rage, regret, and loneliness. Barbara Ella Milton, Jr. I do not know the circumstances surrounding my conception. I have tried many times to get that story from my mother, but she never told me. I deduced from her silence that the facts would not tell a happy story. Not being conceived in love is a hard way to gestate and grow, and when I came into the world, I was barely able to thrive. I entered the world in May of 1959 when my mother was just shy of her 15th birthday. I was a premature, underweight, blue baby who spent the first 8 weeks in an incubator. My mother told me many times over the years that I looked like a blue rat. I was so small, it seemed I could fit inside a pair of baby booties, so my mother took to calling me Boot. It's a term of endearment that my family still uses to this day. As for my legal name, when the nurse asked her what my name would be for my birth certificate, my mother was still feeling the effects of sedatives and the trauma of delivering her baby. She had a name in mind for me but couldn't recall it. She said that at that moment she replied, "I don't know what the hell to name her. Give her my name. Call her Barbara Ella Milton and just add Junior on it. And that's how I became Barbara Jr. and not Sonia Denise. At the time of my birth, my grandmother was receiving relief from the state, and because my mother was a minor in her charge, a penalty was enforced. My aunt told me my mother was remanded to the state home for girls for 6 months, a time critical for the bonding between a newborn and a mother. The punishment was to begin as soon as she was discharged from the hospital. My grandmother, who had just had a baby herself, then had 9 children in her care. She agreed to take me when I was released from the hospital a couple of months later. The story goes that my grandmother became overwhelmed with the 10 children and for some period of time surrendered me to her sister, Sarah, until she was able to bring me back to Grandmom's home where she knew I belonged. For the first 9 years of my life, I lived with my grandmother and my aunts and uncles, who I experienced as siblings. I looked different from my aunts and uncles. My complexion was lighter than all of them except for one aunt. My hair was of a different grade. I wore Catwoman glasses and had a huge gap between my 2 front teeth. I had almond-shaped eyes of my mother, and I was scrawny. My mother came in and out of my grandmother's house after she was released from the state home, but I didn't realize for a long time that she was my mother. Many people mothered me, but I did not experience that one consistent, stable connection to the woman who was my birth mother. Many aspects of my childhood were happy. I rode bikes, roller skated, enjoyed school, had friends, and remembered lots of good times with my aunties. I remember dogs and clothes hanging on the line to dry and Kool-Aid. I remember eating bushels of peaches and tomatoes and all kinds of goodies from the store around the corner. I remember Miss Mary's church, where I learned about the Bible and how to play basketball. I also experienced traumatic events, and I have pretty much blocked them out. One of the hardest parts of my childhood was that I longed for my own mother like Ricky had on the Dick Van Dyke Show. It hurt to only have occasional visits and outings with her. I didn't understand why she left me at her mother's house, and I formed a desire to leave. So one particular day when I was 9 years old, I hatched a plan to make it happen. My plan consisted of asking my mother the next time she came by to take me with her when she left so that I could live with her. When the time came to say that to her, I didn't summon up the courage to ask her. I think I was afraid of more rejection. But when she left, I panicked. So unbeknownst to everyone in the house, when my mother got to her car and left, I decided to follow her. I followed the taillights of her red and black 1967 Ford Mustang down State Street toward the 10th Street Bridge. Trolls lived under that bridge. All the children in North Camden knew that, so we avoided it like the plague. But I ran across that rickety bridge anyway, trolls be damned, and continued to follow her car down the long road. I saw her make a right turn just before the traffic light onto a street between 2 rows of houses. I kept walking and running after her. Finally, I got to the street where I saw her turn. There was her car, parked at a house with the number 6 painted above the door. I ran to the door and knocked. My mother answered, and she was startled to see me standing there by myself. She asked, "Who's with you?" I said, "No one. I followed your car. Is this your house? Can I live with you?" She yanked me into that house and scolded me for doing something so stupid and dangerous. She was in shock. She thought I was really audacious and looked at me with a look I would come to know very well over the next 8 years I lived with her. It was the "I can't believe what the hell you just did" kind of look. Then she said, "If you were smart enough to get here by yourself, then you can live here." Shortly thereafter, I moved in. That house was not very big. In fact, my bedroom had a pool table in it. It was a rocky beginning, and it was not like I dreamt it would be at all. I seemed to get on my mother's nerves most of the times. She was a tough disciplinarian. I was driven to do well in school so that she could be proud of me, but she had difficulty expressing it. I was part of the original latchkey cohort and took on lots of responsibility for myself because she worked 2 jobs to keep the rent paid and the lights on and food in the house. She enhanced my ability to cook meals, wash clothes, and iron. I learned how to clean a house and pass her inspections. My mother loved music and exposed me to all kinds of it, from gospel to country to Motown to opera and jazz. She taught me card games and took me to sports. We took vacations to the Jersey Shore, and she kept my connections to my grandmother and aunts and uncles, especially during holidays. However, from the time I moved in with my mother, we were destined to have a major collision. My preteen years were not well received by her. Once I started menstruating and began growing into a mature body, my mother became obsessed with me not becoming pregnant. That meant she watched me like a hawk. She constantly accused me of sexual escapades and said no to most social events with my peers. I could not handle her obsession and became more defiant and rebellious. That meant more banishment to my bedroom and many times with no food to eat. We had big clashes, and sometimes they were physical. I became very angry and ran away to friends' houses several times. Finally, I came up with a plan to get free. I would kill myself and burn her precious house down in the process. The plan was to do it on a day when she worked 2 jobs. That way, I could go to school and see all the teachers and friends I loved just one more time. I'd have to hang out one more time after school, too. Then I would write a suicide note and place it in the freezer, because in pictures I had seen of homes that burnt up, usually the fridge was still intact. I wanted everyone to know from my note that she loved her things and her home way more than she loved me, and that she never wanted a child, and would take me out of this world because she brought me into it. I would beat her to the punch and give her the freedom she wanted. I also had a message in that note to another person who was harming me and had been for a long time. My death would end the 2 streams of pain I was experiencing, and I welcomed it. Then I would sit on one of her bar stools in the living room while her house went up in flames with me in it. That is what I set out to do, except that when I struck the match and lit the curtains on fire in her living room, I freaked out. I immediately jumped off the stool, ran to the kitchen, grabbed a pot, and started furiously filling it with water. I repeatedly threw it at the flaming curtain and managed to put the fire out. Smoke filled the living room. I opened the front door and the back door. I tried to get the smell out. My heart was beating incredibly fast, and I was shaking. But at a certain point, a kind of peace came over me, and I closed the doors. I sat on the stool and waited until my mother arrived from work to receive my punishment. I thought, where I failed, she would surely succeed. She will surely kill me tonight. I will never forget my mother's face when she entered the rear door of the house. She could see the water on the floor and the charred curtains that had fallen on the crushed black velvet living room couch. She could smell the lingering smoke in the air, and she saw me on the stool, staring at her, looking straight through her. She dropped her things on the floor, looked at me, and made an attempt to say something, but nothing came out. Then she asked what happened. I said, I tried to burn the house down. I wanted to die. After a minute, she said, something is wrong with you. Something is really wrong with you. Why would you do this? She sent me to my room. Not a curse word, not a fist, not a belt, nothing. The next day, she took me to a psychiatrist, and that was the first person I told my troubles to. And I let it all out. Afterward, he talked to my mother. She told me that the doctor thought I was a smart person and that she thought I was too. She said that she was going to do something about her hollering, and that she would never have to hit me, and that she would never hit me like I was a man again, and that we were going to be okay. She asked if I wanted to go home with her. I said, yeah. She told me she would let me do more things after school, and she would try to trust me more. Wow. My mother showed up at long last. We moved from the projects soon after that to a bigger home in North Camden, closer to my grandmother. My mother was diagnosed with Graves' disease, which gave some indication of her inability to manage her rage. She began taking medications, which seemed to make a difference. Things had improved somewhat, but we still had lots of problems being with each other, especially as I continued to achieve academically and when I came out to her as gay in the 9th grade. It seemed the more I did well in school, the more salt was poured into the festering wounds that my mother had about her own, quote, failure, unquote, in education. And when I told her I liked girls as she did, it did not go over well. Somehow she saw that as her failure too. My friends thought, wow, it'll be easy for you. Your mom will accept you because she is gay. But that wasn't how it played out at all. She begged me to get out of my tomboy thinking and not to travel down the road of living in the gay life because it's too hard. She saw me as weak because I was emotional. I cried at the drop of a dime, and she hated that. But things were different for me in the 1970s than for her in the 1950s and 60s. I never felt the fear and shame of liking girls. I just liked them, and the tenderness of girls' love felt like real love to me. I had lots of lesbian friends at school and on my sports teams. Mom's rejection of my emerging lesbian self and her inability to rejoice in my success in school and sports and the accolades I was receiving at my manpower and summer jobs brought up all those feelings of resentment and rage in her that I thought she had put to rest. I decided that I needed to do whatever I could to survive being in her home and focus on school and sports to increase my chances of scholarships so I could get the heck out of Dodge. I really didn't care if I ever came back to Camden. And more or less, that's what I did. I left my mother's home in December of 1977 after turning 18 years old and headed to early orientation for college. I ended up at a private women's Catholic college in southwestern Pennsylvania on academic and sports scholarships. The school was 5 hours away on the Amtrak line from Philly. That was just far enough away to make me feel I was really away, but allowed me to get home easily. I had a really tough first year because I was entirely unprepared for the majority white, upper class, Catholic, heterosexual world I was plunged into. I had been at the top of my class in high school, but was not at all prepared academically for the demands of college. However, I excelled in sports and quickly began to identify the lesbians on campus and in the nearby town and enjoyed my social life. In my second year, I improved academically and tried to test out the theory that I was not gay. I became pregnant, even with a condom in use, and I easily and legally terminated the pregnancy. I did not want a child, and if I did not have a child in love, then I would not bring a child into this world. I had zero conflict with my personal choice. I have never birthed any children. Not all women have to have kids. I was clear about that. I told my mother about my decision and she was not happy, but she told me I was grown and I could do what I wanted. I also decided to leave the pre-med track I was on in favor of social work. This seemed to be the academic track that would help me understand social and political issues that I was coming to care so much about, and in order to acquire the skills to create social change. I remember explaining to my mother the change I was making, and she was very disappointed. Conversations were hard with her while I was away at school. She helped me out when she could, but mostly I learned to hustle and to have the money I needed to keep up with the Joneses. Of course, I got caught in the credit card trap. I loved plopping that card out, and I hated paying the bills. My grandmother, on the other hand, listened to me when I called her and asked questions about my studies and took an interest in my life. Of course, I didn't tell her I was gay until many years later, to which she replied, "What do you think I am, a dum-dum?" She had known all along. I graduated with a BA in social work, and my mother and grandmother attended the ceremony. That made me happy, but it was tense most of the way. It was very brave of my mother and grandmother to make that long drive. I think they were both tired and overwhelmed by the entire experience. They fussed about my hair and my clothing. It wasn't easy having 3 generations of Miltons in the same space, but we got through the experience. My first job was with a grassroots political organization working against nuclear power plants, pro-environmental and economic justice issues. Then I became a canvasser for the National Citizen Labor Energy Coalition, and that opened me up to a world of organizing at the grassroots level, coalition building, winning public policies and elections. It was exhilarating and life-changing work. It was a job that channeled my inner rage towards social change and validated me as a queer woman. Most of my bosses were out lesbian women, which helped me to let go of my queer shame and validated me as a whole person. I moved back to New Jersey after earning a promotion to work in a startup office in central New Jersey. My mother wanted me to live with her in the house she had recently purchased in a different part of Camden. I thought I would make an attempt at reconciliation with her, but we started clashing immediately. She had very strict rules about everything in the house and how I should behave. She also expected me to pay half the mortgage and half all the expenses on my very small salary. I didn't know till years later that she was having financial problems herself and was in danger of losing the house. I left her house after a short time and left my Camden family. I did the familiar disappearance act as my mindset was in an all-or-nothing mode. One of my regrets is losing steady contact with all the rest of my aunts, uncles, extended family, and childhood friends. I'm grateful to have reestablished many of those relationships with the help of time and Facebook. When I did leave my mother's house, it landed me on a series of sofas in the homes of various activist friends and co-workers until I landed my first apartment of my own in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I connected to the lesbian scene there and devoted myself to the social change work for the next 6 years and softball in my spare time. The work was exciting and intense, and after 6 years, I was burnt out. I went back to direct practice social work. I had jobs in a homeless shelter for women and children and in an agency developing a substance abuse prevention program for inner city children. In 1993, I met and fell in love with Kay Osborne. I had always said I would never get serious about a white woman or a woman with children, but look who the universe decided I was to make a life with, a British woman with 2 teenage children. I knew love when I felt it, and I stayed. I moved into her house in Jersey City, about 2 hours north of Camden. We're still together today, and it has brought me the joy of 2 stepchildren and their partners, and in due course, 2 grandsons. I had set aside my academic aspirations during the years of activism, but now I got back on track and worked for the Master's in Social Work at Rutgers University. I became a clinical social worker with a specialty in the mental health of children and families. My mother did not attend the graduation ceremony, but my grandmother and my aunt did. I love social work, and I really wanted to make a difference in the lives of Black children, their families, and our communities. I felt the best way to do that was beyond my direct practice, was to seek and obtain my PhD in social welfare, which I received in 2009. My research was in the area of Black resilience. I looked at a sampling of narratives recorded in the 1930s of people who had been born into slavery in the southern states. From these historical narratives, I constructed a matrix of protective factors detailing how they managed to survive and sometimes even thrive during and after bondage. My purpose was to see how these protections could serve as guideposts for Black people today, how we can draw on the wisdom of the ancestors. My interest in this subject comes directly from my own experience. People would tell me I am amazingly resilient, and I think it is true. But where did the resilience come from? I wanted to learn more and pass it on to others. My mom came to the graduation. I think she was very proud of me, but at the same time, she did not tell me so directly. I gave her a copy of my dissertation, but she never read it fully. She said it was hard to read about slavery. It just makes her angry, and I totally get that. In the summer of 2012, I was diagnosed with urothelial carcinoma, cancer of the lining of the urinary tract. This is a chronic form of cancer for which there is currently no cure. The treatment is a scoping of the bladder and scraping of tumors every 90 days. In 2016, the cancer moved into my right kidney. I had 6 weeks of chemotherapy, and then the kidney, ureter, and bladder cuff were removed. In 2018, I experienced a blockage of my left kidney and went into severe renal failure. The cancer is now in that kidney also. For a while, it seemed that for sure I would lose this kidney and live the rest of my life on dialysis. However, thanks to the grace of God and a wonderful team at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, I received an experimental treatment under a clinical trial, and the kidney is still in my body, and so far free of high-grade aggressive cancer. I had other health issues too. I was morbidly obese, had high cholesterol, congenital heart condition, spinal cord issues from 2 car accidents, and a couple of wicked falls. I was not in good shape, and I was becoming increasingly difficult to meet the demands of adjunct teaching, direct private practice, clinical mentoring, writing a newspaper column, producing my TV show, and consulting. Most times I was tethered to a toilet in adult diapers, unable to stand for long periods of time, and was anxious and depressed. In 2015, I began to slow things down, and in 2017, I applied for and was approved for Social Security and permanent disability. This allowed me to put the focus on my health and to fight for wellness one day at a time. It's a journey I am still on today. Thank you for listening to the chapter Introduction in the book I wrote called Heeding the Caregiver Call, the story of Barbara Ella Milton Sr. and Alzheimer's disease.